Gintod pilak, inaakit ang iyong mga mata. Kapangyarihan sa labi, hinihila ka sa lugar na tila di mo tansya. Tatalian,
The briefing of the Development Budget Coordination Committee on the macroeconomic assumptions and fiscal targets used in the formulation of the fiscal year 2026 National Expenditure Program is now called to order. Please stand for the singing of the national anthem, and please remain standing for a minute of silent prayer.
Panginoong Diyos, kami po ay lumalapit sa inyo ng may mapagpakumbabang puso. Hinihiling po namin ang inyong paggabay at karunungan sa pagsisimula ng aming gawain. O Diyos, nawa ay pagpalain mo po ang bawat isa at pumagitna ka po sa amin sa araw na ito. Nawa ang gawain na ito ay maging daan upang kami ay magkaroon ng karagdagang kaalaman na tutulong sa amin upang kami ay mas lumago at kami ay magkaroon pa ng mas maayos na relasyon sa bawat isa. Tulungan ninyo po kami magkaroon ng bukas na isip at puso at pagkakaisa upang mapaglingkuran ka namin sa lahat ng aming gagawin. Bigyan ninyo po kami ng lakas upang masunod ang inyong nais sa aming buhay. At gamitin ang mga talento na ibinigay mo upang makatulong sa aming kapwa. Idinadalangin namin ang lahat ng ito sa pangalan ni Jesus. Amen.
Committee Secretary, please acknowledge the resource persons present here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. May we acknowledge our distinguished guest this morning from the Special Assistant to the President for Investment and Economic Affairs, Honorable Frederick Go. Thank you, sir. And from the Department of Budget and Management, Secretary Amina Pangandaman, Undersecretary Janet Abuel, Undersecretary Rolando Toledo, Assistant Secretary Mary Ann de la Vega, Assistant Secretary Romeo Matthew Balangkit. And from the Department of Economy, Planning and Development, Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, Undersecretary Attorney Melbourne Pana, Undersecretary Rosemary Edelion, Undersecretary Joseph Capuno, Undersecretary Carlos Bernardo Abad Santos, Undersecretary Attorney Glenda Rumor, Assistant Secretary Claire Dennis Mapa of the PSA, and Assistant Secretary Reynaldo Cancio. And from the Department of Finance, Secretary Ralph G. Recto. Undersecretary Maria Lualhati Dorotan Tiuseco. Undersecretary Dumini Velasquez. Undersecretary Carlos Fermin Adriano. Undersecretary Charlito Martin Mendoza. Undersecretary Catherine Fong. Undersecretary Joven Balbosa. Undersecretary Rolando Tungpalan. Undersecretary Maria Edita Tan. Undersecretary Nino Raymond Alvina. Assistant Secretary Daniel Marie Reza Kulangen. And National Treasurer Sharon P. Almanza of the BTR. And from the BIR, Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr. And from the BOC, Commissioner Ariel Nepomuceno. From the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Deputy Governor Zeno Ronald Abenoa. Director City Hanicia Botocan. Director Dennis Bautista. Senior Director Plorabel Santos Madrid. Managing Director Leila Magda Rivera. And General Counsel Roberto Figueroa. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, ComSec. May we now recognize the Honorable Ferdinand Martin G. Romualdez, Speaker of the House of Representatives, for his opening remarks.
Mga kasama ko sa Kongreso, mga miyembro ng Gabinete, At higit sa lahat, mga kabaybayang kong Pilipino, magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat. Today, we open the Development Budget Coordination Committee deliberations. This is far more than a routine fiscal exercise. It is where the lifeblood of our nation, the people's money, is measured against the people's needs. Here in this august chamber, we commence the critical work of transforming vision into action, action into lasting progress. Just as every Filipino household plans its budget with care, we too must ensure that each peso deserves a meaningful purpose. Bawat piso ay may pinaglalaanan at bawat gastusin ay dapat may pakinabang sa tao. This is not merely a fiscal principle, it is a moral imperative. It is our solemn duty to translate this proposed 6.793 trillion budget into classrooms for our youth, medicine for our sick, roads for our farmers, jobs for our youth, and security for our nation. This is why the House has opened its doors wider than ever before. We've ended the practice of the small committee. We welcome civil society observers because the Filipino people deserve full transparency in how their hard-earned money is planned, allocated, and spent. Kapag malinaw ang proseso, malinaw din ang tiwala. At kapag may tiwala ang taong bayan, may lakas ang pamahalaan. Transparency is not an option. It is the cornerstone of democratic governance. But candor requires that we also confront the hard truths. Our economy continues to feel the effects of global uncertainty. Inflation weighs heavily on the poor. Our debts swollen by the pandemic must be managed wisely. Growth targets must inspire confidence not only in our people, but in investors and markets that watch us closely. That is why this DBCC is so vital. It is the crucible where assumptions are examined, where aspirations are tested against reality. The national budget is not merely an accounting ledger, it is a vision. It stands as the government's most important policy instrument, the blueprint that must bring to life President Ferdinand Marcos Jr.'s call for a bagong Pilipinas. It is a comprehensive plan to connect communities, lower food costs, uplift education, strengthen healthcare systems, and create livelihoods and safeguard our sovereignty. To our partners in the executive branch, allow me to be clear. We will scrutinize, we will question, we will deliberate thoroughly. But we do so not as adversaries, but as allies, united by a shared purpose. For at the end of the day, at the heart of our collaboration lies a common goal: to deliver a better, more dignified life for every Filipino family. Let this DBCC be remembered not only for figures presented, but for the principles we upheld. Let it be said that here, leaders chose honesty over evasion, service over self-interest, and unity over division. Budgets are not built on numbers alone. They are built on trust. And trust is built on truth. If we honor the truth, this budget will not merely be a plan of government. It will be a covenant of hope with every Filipino. Maraming salamat. Mabuhay ang sambayanang Pilipino. Mabuhay ang bagong Pilipinas.
Thank you very much, Speaker. May I now request the indulgence of the body for the chairperson to deliver my sponsorship remarks, rather opening remarks. Sa aking mga kapwa mambabatas sa Kongreso, sa ating mga kasama mula sa Development Budget Coordination Committee, at sa ating mga kababayang nakasubaybay sa unang araw ng budget deliberations, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. We envision the budget for fiscal year 2026 to be centered on the Filipino people, both in terms of one, expenditure priorities, and two, the budget process itself. This is why we fully support the framework laid out by the DBCC, which emphasizes human capital development in crafting the 2026 national budget by prioritizing investments in quality education, healthcare, and workforce upskilling. Sisiguraduhin po ng Kongreso na ang 6.793 trillion pesos na budget ng ating bansa ay pakikinabangan ng ating mga kababayan. Mararamdaman at makikita po ninyo ito. Mas maginhawang pagpapagamot, mas dekalidad na edukasyon at mga classroom, mas maraming dekalidad na mga trabaho, at mas magandang mga kalsada para sa mga magsasaka upang mas mapadali ang pagdala ng inyo pong mga produkto sa merkado. Nadidinig po natin ang panawagan ng ating mga kababayan na mas maging bukas ang proseso at magkaroon po kayo ng mas malakas na boses sa pagbuo ng budget. In response to our people's clamor, and in support of the call of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and of Speaker Martin Romualdez towards increased transparency and public participation in the budget process, we will enact major reforms. We will abolish the small committee, open the bicameral conference committee proceedings, and institutionalize civil society engagement in the budget process. Our commitment is firm. In this budget and in the years to come, we are bringing the Filipino back in the center of the budget process where you rightfully belong. Ang bawat piso ng budget na ito ay galing sa dugo at pawis ng mga Pilipino. Kaya magiging masusi po ang deliberasyon ng inyong Kongreso sa mga darating na buwan upang siguraduhin na ang bawat piso ay mailalaan para sa ikabubuti ng ating mga kababayan. To our partners in the executive branch, we look forward to working with you in crafting a budget that will be truly responsive to our people's needs and will unlock our country's full potential. To my colleagues in the House, we have a Herculean task in front of us, deliberating on our country's largest budget to date in the midst of implementing critical reforms that will challenge long-standing, decades-long practices. But while doubly arduous, I ask you to please join us on this journey because we are at a critical juncture. The work that we will be doing in the next months alone will be an important determining factor in safeguarding the Filipino people's faith in the budget process and in securing our country's economic future for generations to come. We need to do this for our country. We need to do this for the Filipino people. Maraming salamat po para sa Diyos at Bayan. COMSEC, please recognize the members present here today, as well as the members of the civil society organizations.
May we acknowledge the presence of the Deputy Speaker Ronaldo Puno, Senior Deputy Speaker J.J. Suarez, Majority Leader Ferdinand Alexander Marcos, Senior Vice Chair Abet Garcia, Deputy Majority Leader Jan Baronda, Deputy Speaker Faustino D., Senior Deputy Minority Leader Edgar Erice, Deputy Minority Leader Antonio Tino, Deputy Minority Leader Percy Sendanya, Deputy Minority Leader Sergio Dago, Deputy Majority Leader Munir Arbison Jr., Deputy Speaker Yaser Balindong, Deputy Minority Leader Leila de Lima, Deputy Majority Leader Bong Tebes, Deputy Majority Leader Marlene Agabas, Deputy Majority Leader PM Vargas, Deputy Majority Leader Howard Ginto, Vice Chairpersons Rufus Rodriguez, Vice Chairpersons Brian Poe, Jose Alvarez, Monique Lagdameo, Roger Mercado, Agustina Dice Tina Pancho, Joseph Tan, Romel Angara, Alexandria Gonzalez, Lalo Matugas, Raman Nava, Isabel Sagarbaria, Josefina Talyado, Maria Cristina Lopez, Cherise Fernandez, Johan Bautista, and also Vice Chair Romeo Momo, Dante Garcia, and Vice Chair Marcy Teodoro, and Vice Chair Bernadette Escudero. And for the members, Representative Nico Daza, Rolando Valeriano, Jojo Ang, Nathaniel Aducado, Agatha Cruz, Chel Jokno, Maria Isabel Arenas, Arlene Ayon, Audrey Saviri, Miro Kimbo, Salvador Plato, Joseph Yu, former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Representative Celso Regencia, Representative Ferdinand Beltran, Representative Rene Cu, Representative Florabel Yatco, Eleanor Bulot Begtang, Saldi Villa, Antolin Oreta, Lynette Fereng, Lenabel Villarica, Linabel Copilar, Nelson Legacion, Doris Maniquez, Mark Anthony Santos, Ricardo Cruz, Iris Montes, Caterina Chuatay, Representative Jan Rurik Pajernos, Deputy Speaker Bambi Emano, Deputy Majority Leader Ramon Rodriguez, Representative Jerry Perez, Representative Lonel Zenisa, Representative Ryan Recto, Deputy Speaker Jefferson Conghun, Representative Luis Villaferte, and Representative Romeo Acop. May we also acknowledge the presence of the civil society organizations that we have invited in these proceedings. From the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, Maxine Tanya Hamada. From the Center for Youth Advocacy and Networking, Humphrey Soriano. From Code NGO, Brian Esra Cainglet Gonzalez. From the Commuters for Change, Giselle Manuel. From Health Justice, Ralph de Golacion. From the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, Juan Miguel Villarba Torres. Jose Robredo Institute, Dr. Francisco Magno. Move as One Coalition, Robert C. Multiply Ed Philippines, John Lloyd L. Sura. People's Budget Coalition, Citizens Budget Tracker, Adolfo Jose Montesa. From the Philippine Legislators Committee on Population and Development, Maria Aurora Kilala. From REID Foundation, Karen Valenzuela. And Safe Travel Philippines, Ann Camille Fajardo. Social Watch Philippines, Alce Kitalag. And from the Makati Business Club, Gita Keswani. And may we also acknowledge the entire DBCC family, the support staff. Good morning to all of you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, ComSec. We would like now to proceed with the presentation of the Development Budget Coordination Committee. May we now start with the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
Madam Speaker.
May we now recognize Deputy Governor Zeno Ronald Abenoja for the presentation.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, may I be recognized?
The Chair recognizes Honorable Daza.
Madam Speaker, Chair, sorry. May I make a parliamentary inquiry?
Please proceed.
Madam Chair, thank you for recognizing me on my parliamentary inquiry. But before I begin, I would like to make a short manifestation. I would like to thank you and congratulate you, Speaker Romualdez, Majority Leader Marcos, and Minority Leader Lebanon, and the entire leadership for the opening remarks you made, along with Speaker, on the abolishment of the small committees after third reading, as it was done in the past, or as it was practiced, and that the bicameral conference committee will now be open to the public, as well as the institutionalization of civil society organizations. This is in line with the pronouncement, of course, of the President in his SONA, and this will be a good step forward for budget transparency and public participation. And I'd like to recognize your efforts at the onset of our budget deliberations. But in line with my parliamentary inquiry under our House rules, in section-
Madam Chair, point of order.
Please
There is
proceed,
always-
Honorable Rodriguez.
My point of order is that under the rules of the Committee Appropriation, there is a listing of those who are going to interpolate. It starts with the minority and then goes to majority after all the presentation that will be done. Otherwise, if you'll allow, we have very good points from Congressman Dasa, but if we allow interventions at this point, then we are going to not follow the order of interpellation and manifestation. So sadly, I'm sorry, but I have to do this call to order because we have to follow our rules. Madam Chair.
May
For your
I
ruling.
ask the Honorable Daza as to the nature of this parliamentary inquiry?
Well, Madam Chair, in line with my parliamentary inquiry, under the House rules in Section 35, the fourth paragraph provides, a bill, resolution, or petition shall be set for a hearing only after it has been referred in plenary session to an appropriate committee. But because the NEP, in my understanding, has yet to be filed as the GAB, my inquiry is this a briefing or a hearing?
This is a briefing, as mentioned by the chair during the call to order.
So, Madam Chair, it is my understanding that because the GAB will not be filed until September 1st, my question is, perhaps because maybe I'm a first-termer, so please enlighten and satisfy my curiosity. Why does it take so long for the GAB to be filed, considering we received it last week?
The process of...
Madam Chair, I call for the ruling of my point of order.
May I request for the members to wait for the chair for you to be recognized by the chairperson before proceeding. Honorable Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I call for a ruling of the chair on my call to my point of order.
Madam Chair, may I also raise a point of order now?
Before that, I would just like to quickly respond to the query by the Honorable Daza. The reason why it takes so long, it's a tedious process. So every line that's there in the NEP has to be encoded manually and translated into the General Appropriations Bill. That's why we would need that time in terms of the preparation and the printing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may just...
Before you proceed to your next point, may I recognize the Honorable Deputy Speaker, Ronnie Puno.
Yes, I just want to ask, since we're already talking points of order and parliamentary inquiries, has this converted already into a committee hearing instead of a briefing?
Yes, so this is not yet a hearing. This will be a briefing. Hearings would only be conducted once the GAB is filed formally. So hence, the current layout of today is a briefing.
May I inquire while we are making this a briefing instead of a hearing?
Sorry, there's feedback, so we're unable to hear the queries. If I may request the Honorable Puno to
Yes.
kindly reiterate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just inquiring why this is a briefing instead of a hearing.
Yes, because hearings are only allowed once the GAB has been formally filed, but we are allowed to conduct briefings prior to the filing of the GAB, especially since the nature of today's hearing pertained to the BESF, which is a prerequisite for the filing of the GAB.
But I understand from the rules, Madam Chair, that the Speaker can waive the 5-day requirement and allow a hearing to be conducted immediately. I am just at a loss as to why we're having a briefing instead of a hearing. And then later on in the proceedings, we will then convert this briefing into a hearing, while we can just make this a hearing from day one.
The determining factor at the moment is the filing of the GAB. Given that the GAB is not yet filed, we are unable to turn this into a hearing despite the waiving of the 5-day rule, because the GAB will be filed in a week or so. So we cannot conduct hearings on the GAB given that the GAB has not been filed. And subsequently referred to the Committee on Appropriations.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point, but I really don't understand why it has to be a briefing instead of a hearing. Since the senior deputy speaker is here, I believe we might have a quorum in the halls of Congress right now. What is to prevent us now from moving that the proposed appropriations be read into the minutes of the first reading and be assigned already to the Appropriations Committee, so that the committee can take cognizance and jurisdiction already over this matter? Because right now, as a briefing, the committee has no jurisdiction over anything that is going on.
So in the technical sense, we are unable to conduct a hearing on the GAB, given that the GAB is yet to be filed. So that is the subject matter of the hearings later on. It is the GAB. So now what we're conducting the briefings on would be the macroeconomic assumptions and details on the sources of financing, which will then feed into the the GAB. Essentially, what we need to determine today is whether there is sufficient sources of financing to be able to finance the expenditures as stated in the NEP, which would later be turned to the GAB. So that's the reason why the sequence of events would be the BESF would be turned over, and then after that, we would have to conduct the hearings on the BESF, macroeconomic assumptions, sources of financing. After that, we can determine that there is enough sources of financing to finance the expenditures listed on the NEP, and thereafter, the NEP can be turned into the GAB.
Madam Chair.
Thank you for your explanation, Madam Chair. I will leave the matter there, but I will serve notice that I will bring this matter up when Congress is in session or the House is in session as a point of order again, because I believe that it's important that the Committee on Appropriations assume jurisdiction already in a formal way over all of these proceedings. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker Puno. May I recognize Honorable Brian Pope.
Madam Chair, considering we've already discussed the situation with the hearing versus briefing, in the interest also of time, since all of our secretaries have made time to be here and brief us today, maybe we could proceed. I'm very interested to hear what they have to say.
Thank you very much. Before we proceed with the presentation of the BSP, may we request the technical team, the audio team, to please lessen the echo. It's a little bit challenging for everyone inside the plenary to hear. Actually, that's why we've been asking everyone to repeat their statements, because it's a little bit hard for us to hear. There's feedback.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Honorable Tiangco.
Madam Chair, I think you have to rule on the point of order of the Honorable Rodriguez unless he withdraws his motion.
The ruling of the chair is we will proceed today as a briefing, not a hearing.
Okay, thank you very much. But I would just like to clarify that the sequence is, as Honorable Rodriguez remembers, and I hope we modify it. I hope we sustain it. Is it's minority, independents, and then majority, right, Honorable Rodriguez?
We agree with that, and that is why there's a listing here, and there is the minority, there is an independent group, and we have the majority, and then it will be alternating. But
Yes.
always starting with the minority, then the independent, Madam Chair, and then the majority. But we have to proceed already.
Yes, thank you.
Otherwise, if we allow parliamentary inquiry, questions and suggestion manifestation, then we cannot really start the hearing. The reason why this is a hearing, Madam Chair, is because the GAB has not yet been filed by our rules and referred to our plenary. There's nothing to hear. But because of the lack of material time, and we want to finish this budget for the development of our country, this will just be a briefing because there can be no hearing. There's no general appropriations bill filed yet and referred to the on first reading to the committee. After it is filed on September 1, then we go into the hearing itself. But what happens now? The same banana. What happens now? There will be presentation, there will be interpellations up to August 31, and then we have September 1. But we are going to adopt in the committee the briefing here to be converted to a hearing once we already have this GAB, General Appropriations Bill, already pending in the plenary and already called by first reading. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The last point that we will say about this matter is that the proper sequence is clear. First is the submission of the BESF. Second is the briefing and deliberations on the financing framework and aggregate expenditures. Third is the filing of the GAB. Fourth is the detailed deliberations of the NEP only after the GAB is formally referred to the Committee on Appropriations. I would also like to assure the Honorable Tiangco that we will follow that sequence in the interpellation. So we'll start with the minority, then independent, and then majority. May I now proceed with the presentations? I would like to recognize the Honorable Deputy Governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Deputy Governor Zino Ronald Abenoja, for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Honorable Congressman, Honorable House Speaker Representative Martin Romualdez, Honorable Chair of the Committee on Appropriations, Micaela Swansing, and Honorable Representatives present at today's briefing. Good morning to all of you. It is my privilege to present our assessment of the monetary, financial, and external sector performance of the country, as well as the macroeconomic assumptions behind the proposed national government budget for the fiscal year 2026. The Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas is a resource institution.
Madam Chair, point of order. Well,
May I, before I recognize the Honorable Tino, would it be possible, let's just let the BSP finish their presentation
Madam
first.
Chair, my point is that in briefings, it is customary for the head of agency to make the presentation. But I do not see the governor of the Bangko Sentral here to make the presentation. And we have not heard an explanation either, Madam Chair.
So we received last August 15 a letter from the governor of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Governor Eli Remolona Jr., requesting to be excused from today's DBCC briefing, as this coincides with the second high-level bilateral meeting between the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas and the National Bank of Cambodia. So this meeting was finalized last July 10, 2025, before we even convened for the first regular session of Congress, and it is scheduled to be held today. So given that this is bilateral in nature between two central banks of two countries, the committee and the House leadership decided to allow Governor Remolona to be excused from today's hearing.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, but the chair recognizes that it is customary for the heads of agencies to present during the DBCC. Deputy Governor Abenoja, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we will provide a briefing as a resource institution of the DBCC. Let me start by looking at the performance of the Philippines in terms of inflation. If you look at inflation, inflation is cooling down in the past few months. If we can recall, inflation increased right after the Russia-Ukraine crisis, It reached a peak of 8.7% 2 years ago, January and February of 2023, and that was caused mainly by the uptick in energy inflation as well as subsequently food inflation. But since then, inflation has gone down steadily. And we point here 2 points, Madam Chair. First, food inflation, the green part of the bar charts that I am showing, has gone down in recent months. In fact, it has reached negative inflation, year-on-year inflation, in some months in the second quarter of this year. A second point, Madam Chair, energy inflation has also come down. So both these two important aspects of inflation has moderated and facilitated this reduction in our inflation. But perhaps the second point is equally important. The blue bar refers to the core inflation. And this is what we call the underlying pressure on inflation. And that is important because it is that portion of inflation that has more meaning in terms of the inflation outlook moving forward. If core or underlying inflation is going down, then we have additional source of comfort that price pressures may moderate moving forward. Now, if we go to the next slide, what do we see exactly on the part of the BSP on where inflation will be in the coming months? This is shown in the chart in the screen. As we can see, inflation is anticipated to continue to decline in 2025. In fact, it will be below 2% the rest of the year on average. The target in terms of inflation average for the year is 3% plus minus 1%, or 2 up to 4%. This year, we think we will average less than 2%, but next year, inflation will steadily increase, but still remain within the target of 2 up to 4%. The increase in inflation next year, although it will remain within target, could be traced back to what we call statistical effects or base effects, given the low inflation that we are experiencing in 2025. However, it will remain moderated, partly driven by stable international oil prices. Given these developments in inflation, as well as near-term outlook on output, what has been the response of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas to help manage the inflation environment? On the left side, we show here the interest rate movements that was undertaken by the central bank. When inflation was increasing 2 years back, we increased interest rates by a total of 450 basis points, or 4.5%, from 2% all the way to 6.5%, to help anchor inflation expectations and help moderate inflation. However, when we started seeing better inflation numbers, including core inflation, inflation expectations, the central bank started dialing back its policy rate. And that is what we show here. Since August of last year, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas has reduced interest rates by about 125 basis points. So from 6%, interest rates has gone down to 5.25%. And in the latest press statement from the Monetary Board, the central bank is looking to continue to have an easing of its monetary policy, will remain data dependent, and that could be examined every meeting date of the Monetary Board on the monetary policy stance. On the right side of the chart is an equally important action by the central bank. We reduced the reserve requirements for large banks. This is the portion of deposits received by banks that they have to keep in their vaults to service unforeseen withdrawals or sudden needs of liquidity. It used to be as high as 20%, but that is a costly friction or part of intermediation cost. Right now, we have reduced it to 5% effective March of this year. What that implies is that it provides more liquidity into the system for more credit activities of the central bank. It reduces the cost of banks so they can better serve their clients. So we think these two moves are very important in managing inflation as well as facilitating the efficiency of the banking system. Now, looking at the banking system, how are they performing so far? In this next slide, we show that the Philippine banking continue to be resilient to support domestic economic growth. The first set of numbers show that the banking system continue to expand so that it can provide services, including credit services, to households and businesses. At the same time that it is expanding, it continues to have adequate capital and continue to be liquid so that it is being managed well and can react or continue to be resilient even with unforeseen shocks. So the capital adequacy ratio, CAR, the liquidity ratios are all above the minimum regulatory thresholds that the Bangko Sentral has set for big commercial banks. Then finally, the third set of numbers at the bottom refers to the quality of the assets, particularly the quality of the loan portfolio of banks. The NPL or the non-performing loans ratio is quite small at 3.3%, and they have adequate allowances to cover for this particular portion of the assets of the banking system. So the non-performing loans are steady and are well covered by their allowances. Even as the banking system continues to grow and remain resilient, one advocacy of the central bank is to facilitate access to formal financial services by a broader segment of our population. And we show here in the next slide the progress that we have done so far. On the left side, we show the share of digital payments to total retail payments. Back 5 years ago, let's say in 2019 or 2020, the proportion of digital payments is about 20% of total retail payments. That has gone up quite dramatically, and it now stands at least 57% of total retail payments as of 2024. On the right side, we also show the progress that's being done in terms of opening formal financial or banking accounts for the general population. And here we show the basic deposit accounts. Basic deposit accounts are no-frill accounts. The opening requirements are very minimal. The opening balance is small, and the maintaining balance is actually zero. And we can show that a greater portion of the population has opened this type of basic deposit accounts since 2019. If you look at 2019, about 4 million deposit accounts were opened, but now we have more than 26 million accounts of deposit accounts opened by the adult population of the country. So overall, we think that the banking system remains resilient and continue to provide more resources, more services to a broader segment of our population. And we will continue to do so moving forward, Madam Chair. If you look at the external transactions of the Philippines, we show in this slide two charts, Madam Chair. On the left side is the summary of our trade transactions. Trade in goods, the blue chart, the blue bar on the left side, and the services and income portion of our external transactions, with the rest of the world. As can be seen, if we look at goods transactions, it's a net deficit. However, if we look at services, and this covers the revenues of business, process outsourcing industry, as well as tourism receipts, the yellow bar, that's a positive. And if we add into it the remittances of OFWs, the green bar, then it could even be a larger positive number for our external transactions. So this services and income portion partially offsets the deficit that we are experiencing in terms of our trade in goods sector. Now, how much buffer do we have in terms of responding to external shocks? One such buffer is the international reserves. Right now, it's about $106 billion, and that amount is sufficient to pay for about 7 months' worth of imports of goods and services. If you look at our obligations, our principal and interest payments for the next 12 months, that amount of reserves is equivalent to more than 3 times the amount that we have to pay in a span of 12 months in terms of interest and principal payments, Madam Chair. So looking at both metrics, we do have an adequate amount of buffers to help us manage external shocks. We now move, Madam Chair, to the proposed near-term macroeconomic assumptions that underline the budgets that are being presented, that is being presented to Congress. And we show here the key numbers. If you look at headline inflation, it could average between 2 to 3% this year. In fact, our latest number is that it could even be below 2%. And then by 2026, it could average 2 to 4%. That is the assumption that is being adopted for 2026. It coincides with the inflation target for that year. For Dubai crude oil prices, it's about $60 to $70 per barrel. Right now, what we are seeing in the market are less than, actually, around $70 per barrel in terms of average for the first 6 months of the year. But if we look at 2026 futures prices, Dubai crude oil prices could average about $65 per barrel. In terms of exchange rate, the assumption is that it could hover within the range of 56 pesos to 58 pesos to $1. In terms of 1 year T-bill rate, it could average this year, 2025, at 5 to 6%. And so far, the average for the first 7 months of the year is at 5.7%. For next year, interest rates could go down, could average between 4.5% to 5.5%. That could reflect the decline in inflation as well as the decline in interest rates in central banks, including the Philippines. And that is also the narrative behind the international interest rates. We show here what is called the secured overnight financing rate for 6 months. It's a benchmark interest rate for the international financial markets. This year, we think it could average about 3.5% to 4.5%. So far, for 7 months, it's at 4.2% average. Next year, it could go down further to 3 to 4%. Again, a reflection of possible easing of inflation pressures and decline in policy rates by central banks across major economies. In terms of goods exports, we continue to recover. It might still be a small negative growth rate for exports this year, but for 2026, we are penciling in a 2% growth. For goods imports, it will grow positive this year, about 3.5%, and further expand by an additional 4% by 2026. Both numbers, Madam Chair, reflects in part some of the uncertainty that we are seeing in the external environment, including the adjustments in the tariff as well as trade policies of other economies. To conclude, Madam Chair, we think that the Philippine economy is in a good position. We recognize that the environment that we are operating in is very much uncertain. There are a lot of challenges, and this, for example, could come from global trade tensions and geopolitical uncertainties. But we think that we are able to preserve the fundamental strength of the economy. On the part of the BSP, we will stay vigilant and continue to promote stability that will foster both a sustainable, broad-based, and inclusive growth for our country. I stop here, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Governor Zeno Abenoja of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas for that presentation. My apologies, procedurally, we should have started with the remarks from the chairperson of the DBCC. My apologies, Secretary Mina.
Chair, it's okay.
Apo.
We can proceed with the next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Amina Pangandaman. We'll reserve, I guess, the remarks of the DBCC chairperson alongside the presentation of the DBM later on. May we now move to the next presentation from DepDev. May I now recognize Honorable Secretary of the Department of Economy, Planning and Development, the Honorable Arsenio Balisacan.
Honorable Speaker Martin Romualdez, Honorable Seniors Deputy Speaker David Suarez, Honorable Chairperson Micaela Angela Swansing of the Committee on Appropriations, and the Senior Vice Chairperson of the same committee, Honorable Albert Garcia, Majority Leader Sandro Marcos, Minority Leader Marcelino Tibanan, Honorable members of the House of Representatives, my fellow cabinet secretaries and Deputy Governors Zeno Abenoja, colleagues in government, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the DBCC, I would like to thank the House Committee on Appropriations for the opportunity to present an update on the progress achieved under the Philippine Development Plan 2023 to 2028, along with the economic outlook and policy priorities for the remainder of the Marcos administration. This presentation will cover 3 parts, as indicated in the outline shown on the screen. Allow me to begin with the socioeconomic context and what we have achieved so far. Launched in December 2022, the PDP 2023 to 2028 serves as our nation's medium-term development roadmap. It outlines the strategies, programs, policies, and legislative priorities that must be implemented for us to achieve our development goals. As a document produced after the COVID-19 pandemic, the PDP aims to reinvigorate job creation, accelerate poverty reduction, and steer our economy back on a high growth path toward a prosperous, inclusive, and resilient society. The plan is framed by the Marcos administration's 8-point socioeconomic agenda and anchored on the Filipino people's long-term vision, the Ambition Natin 2040. The PDP aims to drive comprehensive transformation across the social and economic sectors while strengthening the enabling environment, our institutions, regulatory and policy frameworks, and the physical infrastructure that supports them. The table shown on the screen summarizes our progress over the past 2 years. The economy grew by 5.5% in 2023 and 5.7% in 2024. As among the fastest in emerging Asia, despite various global and domestic headwinds. Our per capita gross national income increased from about $4,000 in 2022 to 4,470 in 2024 US dollars. Growth has been accompanied by stronger labor market outcomes, with unemployment falling and the share of wage and salaried workers rising. Most importantly, poverty incidence dropped to 15.5% in 2023, lifting 2.4 million Filipinos above the poverty line. These gains rest on solid macroeconomic fundamentals. After spiking in 2022, headline and food inflation eased, as shown earlier by our Deputy Governor, thanks to targeted supply and demand-side measures. Fiscal indicators, including our deficit to GDP and debt to GDP ratios, remain broadly within sustainable levels. We also advanced in innovation governance, as reflected in our improved ranking in the Global Innovation Index. Allow me now to put these outcomes into perspective and provide some context. The Philippine economy has experienced robust growth over the past 15 years, with GDP growth averaging between 6 to 7%, with the exception of the sharp contraction we experienced in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Most recently, GDP growth has averaged about 5.4% in the first half of 2025, still among the fastest in emerging Asia, demonstrating our economy's resilience and stability despite the uncertainties prevailing in the external environment. Despite the setback from the 2020 pandemic, the Philippine economy rebounded strongly, nearly doubling in size over the past 15 years and outpacing many of its regional peers. This resilience has translated into steady income gains. Our per capita GNI continues to rise, bringing us closer to crossing the World Bank's upper middle income threshold. We are poised to reach this milestone within the PDP period, possibly even this year. Our growth story has attracted international attention, strengthening investor confidence. Over the past 3 decades, net FDI inflows have grown significantly, helping us narrow the gap with regional peers. From January to May 2025, net FDI reached $3 billion, mainly from Japan, the United States, Singapore, and South Korea. While this is lower than last year, the moderation reflects global uncertainties and more cautious investor sentiment. Economic expansion has translated into more and better jobs. Since the first half of 2022, about 4.1 million jobs have been created. Unemployment fell from 6% in 2022 to 4.2% in 2025, while underemployment improved modestly. These figures demonstrate that growth is translating into real opportunities for Filipino people, Filipino workers. Stronger growth and better labor outcomes have delivered meaningful poverty reduction. Poverty incidence fell from 18.1% in 2021 to 15.5% in 2023, exceeding our target and lifting millions of Filipinos above the poverty threshold. Encouragingly, progress is consistent across different norms or standards for poverty assessment, underscoring that we are moving in the right direction. It is equally heartening that the poorest households have recently experienced faster income growth compared to higher income groups. This has reduced income inequality, as shown in the declining Gini index, a broadly measure of inequality, signaling that economic growth has become more inclusive and its benefits are reaching more Filipinos. Still, sustaining long-term growth requires diversifying beyond consumption and services, our primary growth pillars. Agriculture and industry continue to face structural challenges, which we must address to reinforce our economic drivers and generate higher quality jobs. Another challenge is the concentration of economic activity in Mega Manila. That's Metro Manila plus Calabarzon and Central Luzon. While most regions have grown faster than the national average, Mega Manila still accounts for more than half of GDP. Achieving balanced, resilient, and more inclusive development requires diversifying our growth engines across the country. To address these challenges, infrastructure development remains a cornerstone of our strategy. Public investments averaged 5.8% of GDP between 2022 and 2024. Projects such as the Pangil Bay Bridge and the Plaridel Bypass have been completed, while more than 200 flagship projects are ongoing or in the pipeline. These investments are critical to connectivity, resilience, and inclusion. In implementing the PDP, we have made significant progress. At the same time, we also encountered many challenges and roadblocks as the global landscape rapidly shifted and evolved. This year, we undertook a review of the plan. This exercise, undertaken in coordination with various government agencies, aimed to assess the current state of the Philippine economy, identify remaining gaps and lessons learned, and chart priorities moving forward for the remaining plan period. Over the last 3 years of PDP implementation, we have learned several lessons. First, strong macroeconomic fundamentals are indispensable. They enable our economy and our people to withstand various geopolitical, environmental, and technological shocks. Second, responding to these headwinds and skillfully navigating these global megatrends requires strategic, evidence-based, and agile policymaking and actions. Third, robust partnerships across various levels of governance between national and local governments, between the executive and the legislative, between the public and private sectors, and between the Philippine government and its international partners are indispensable toward obtaining effective and meaningful results. Finally, as President Marcos has mentioned in his State of the Nation address, progress is meaningless if ordinary people or ordinary Filipinos do not feel it. Hence, we must prioritize our actions and create impact where people feel it the most. Drawing from these lessons, we are determined to use the remaining years of this administration to fast-track and deliver the transformation agenda with greater urgency. Despite global uncertainties, our targets remain broadly on track. We have recalibrated our GDP growth rates, even as we stay on course to reach upper middle income country status within the plan period. Halfway through 2025, and looking ahead of 2026, multilateral institutions such as the IMF, World Bank, ADB, and AMRO project the Philippines to remain among Asia's fastest growing economies. Fiscal discipline remains central, with debt and deficit to GDP ratios projected to decline further. If target headline and food inflation to stay within 2 to 4% to safeguard price stability. For labor market outcomes, we will sustain gains in employment while focusing on the creation of higher quality jobs. We aim to bring poverty incidence down to single-digit level. We will also continue improving innovation and market governance as critical enablers of productivity-driven growth and long-term economic dynamism. We will use our policy instruments to keep prices low and stable, maintain healthy financial markets, consolidate fiscal gains, and enhance spending efficiency. Meanwhile, we will strengthen our investment ecosystem by deepening trade linkages, boosting the competitiveness of our local industries, and equipping our workforce with the skills to thrive in an AI-driven global economy. We will strategically pursue policies and actions that aim to diversify the sources of economic growth and support the flourishing of our regional growth engines. As the President has mentioned in his SONA, we will continue to prioritize measures that have the most significant impact on Filipinos. This includes improving equitable access to quality healthcare, creating education systems that address learning gaps and skills mismatches, and ensuring food security by raising productivity, developing the blue economy, modernizing logistics, and scaling up farm consolidation. With its impact on inclusion and productivity, connectivity remains high on the development agenda. We will sustain high levels of infrastructure development with over 200 flagship projects across various sectors and in different stages of development and implementation. Alongside this, we're implementing the PPP code to mobilize greater private sector participation in our infrastructure build-up with more than 250 PPP projects already underway and about 230 projects in the pipeline. A stronger policy and regulatory environment reinforces our efforts. Over the past 3 years, we have worked closely with Congress to pass reforms that advance human capital, strengthen investment, reinforce fiscal discipline, and create a predictable and enabling framework for growth. We will continue to collaborate with Congress to prioritize transformative reforms identified in the updated PDP. Reforms that will accelerate the realization of our shared development objectives. In closing, while we have made significant progress, the challenges ahead demand bold reforms and sound policy choices. We must continue to build the capacity of our people, transform our institutions, and future-proof our economy. With the 20th Congress as our steadfast partner, we have the opportunity to uplift the lives of our people and shape the future we desire. Together, under Bagong Pilipinas, let us move closer to our shared vision of a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay for every Filipino. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Balisacan of the Department of Economy, Planning and Development. May we now proceed with the presentation of the Department of Finance. May I respectfully recognize the Secretary of the Department of Finance, Honorable Ralph G. Recto.
Thank you very much. Deputy Speaker, Majority Leader, Madam Chair, the Vice Chairpersons, and members of this committee, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. It is nice to be back in the bigger and better house. which was my home for 11 years, which should have been 13 by now, if I had not been sentenced to do hard labor in the cabinet. Be that as it may, thank you for this opportunity to brief the House about the national government's fiscal position. But before we begin to talk about where we are heading, let us first look back at where this administration began. For our fiscal outlook can only be fully understood within the context of the circumstances we inherited and the global trends that heavily influence our course forward. So allow me to provide these briefly. To start with, this administration came at a time when we needed to rescue an economy flatlined by the pandemic. Bumagsak ang ating ekonomiya ng 9.5%, pinakamababa mula World War II, and the past administration left us with a massive debt of 12.8 trillion. Ang interest sa 12.8 trillion ay kulang-kulang mga 650 billion pesos. And against this backdrop, we navigate an ocean of global uncertainties. Nariyan ang Russia-Ukraine war, El Nino, Israel-Gaza war, Israel-Iran war, geopolitical tensions with China, a Cold War, and now the rise of trade wars. Around the time we crafted the first medium-term fiscal framework in 2022, the world still hoped for a smooth post-pandemic recovery. But these geopolitical tensions interrupted this recovery. Supply chains were disrupted, food and fuel prices surged, inflation soared. In response, central banks tightened interest rates, tempering global growth expectations. Just like every other country, we feel the weight of these global pressures. That is why when I took on the Finance Secretary hat, my first move was to recalibrate our growth and fiscal targets. We now review these targets regularly to keep them attainable, realistic, and adaptive to global headwinds, while staying firmly anchored on sustainable growth. Because fiscal goals rise and fall with growth targets, setting them unrealistically high in uncertain times risk revenue shortfalls. This would widen the deficit and force us to borrow more. To be clear, tempering these targets is not lowering our ambition. It is sound fiscal discipline. It shows confidence in our ability to deliver and the wisdom to pace ourselves so we can finish strong. Our refined medium-term fiscal program now charts a realistic path to reduce our deficit and debt while creating more jobs, raising incomes, and lifting millions of Filipinos out of poverty along the way. And under this, we have ensured that every peso collected or borrowed will be stretched to deliver the biggest bang per buck for the Filipino people. To put it into perspective, the 2025 national budget stands at 6.35 trillion pesos, of which only 4.64 trillion pesos are supportable by revenues. Ibig sabihin, ang gastusin ng gobyerno ay aabot sa 17.4 billion piso kada araw, but only 12.72 billion pesos per day will be financed by revenue collections, Monday to Sunday, every 24 hours, kada 24 na oras. So against this Herculean task of funding a gargantuan budget, we needed to scout for more resources without inflicting new taxes or bequeathing debts to be paid by future generations. And that is why the DOF hiked GOCC's dividend rates to 75% from 50%, which is now one of our major sources of non-tax revenues. And that is why we are privatizing more underutilized government assets. The BIR and BOC have also stepped up with higher collection performances through digitalization, strict enforcement, and plugging of leakages in the tax system, especially from e-commerce. So far, we are on track to meet our medium-term fiscal framework targets, with revenue collections growing by double-digit for the last 3 years at an average of 13.8% annually. Tax collections have also consistently expanded at an average of 11.5% annually. In fact, in 2024, we achieved a revenue effort of 16.7%, the highest in the last 27 years. We are also on course to meet our fiscal program for the year, having already achieved half of our targets. As of mid-year, our tax collection continued to post double-digit growth, totaling 2.03 trillion pesos. This is 10.7% higher than last year. This robust revenue performance placed us among Asia's top revenue to GDP ratios at 16.7% for the first half of 2025. Our expenditures also grew by 9.5% in the first half of the year, reaching 3.03 trillion pesos. Meanwhile, our fiscal deficit for the first half stood at 765.5 billion pesos, within our mid-year target. As a percentage of GDP, our deficit remains manageable at 5.7% for the semester. Our full-year target is 5.5%. With tax collections projected to grow by an average of 10.2% annually from 2025 to 2028, total revenues are on track to hit nearly 6 trillion pesos by the end of the President's term. By 2030, our total revenues will hit 7 trillion pesos. This means that we are asking the BIR and BOC to work harder and boost efficiency at a faster pace. Our projections also took into account the additional revenues from recently enacted reforms, including the VAT on digital services and the Capital Markets Efficiency Promotion Act. Moreover, we expect more revenues from the soon-to-be enacted rationalization of the Mining Fiscal Regime Act. The DOF is also exploring the possibility of having a general tax amnesty this year. Disbursements, on the other hand, are expected to grow by an average of 6% and remain above 20% of GDP. With higher government revenue collections and improved expenditure management, our fiscal deficit is projected to drop from the pandemic high of 8.6% in 2021 to 5.5% in 2025 and down to about 4% by 2028. It will further drop to around 3% by 2030. And crucial to this is ensuring that we prevent wasteful expenditures. That is why we fully support the President's directive to closely scrutinize the national budget. We prepared the National Expenditure Program with the President to ensure that the projects to be funded in 2026 have the highest multiplier effect. For instance, we are allocating 5 to 6% of GDP for infrastructure spending, 4% of GDP to education, and roughly 4% of GDP to health, agriculture, and social welfare to uplift the lives of Filipinos. In the DOF, we always champion two crucial principles. Una, ikalkula na mabuti ang revenue target kasi ang expenditures ay hindi naman open bar sa isang restaurant tapos ang bill ibibigay sa tax collecting agencies. Pangalawa, spend taxes well because if we demand a receipt for goods sold, the people are also entitled to the resibo of government projects financed by the taxes they paid. For good spending is the best way to encourage tax compliance. People are naturally resistant to taxes, but their tax obedience can be won if they will see how the taxes they paid are spent for the right things at the right price, by the right agency, at the right time. And that is exactly what this administration is doing, putting every peso where it matters most: education, health, agriculture, and infrastructure, and digital connectivity. These investments will create more jobs, raise incomes, and pull more Filipinos out of poverty. We also continue to manage our debt according to the highest standards of fiscal discipline, for we are very vigilant not to max out the Philippine National Credit Card. What people need to understand is that when the Marcos Jr. administration took over in 2022, minana po namin ang 12.8 trillion pesos na utang ng mga nakaraang administrasyon. And we are still repaying these large debts incurred during the pandemic while continuously investing in our people. And even with this, we are making improvements on our debt matrix. If you compare it with our neighbors, our debt is relatively lower than that of most countries in Asia. Japan's total debt is at 485 trillion pesos. Singapore at 53.6 trillion pesos. South Korea at 46.89 trillion pesos. Indonesia at 31 trillion pesos. And Thailand at 17.73 trillion pesos. We're also in the middle of the pack in terms of our national government debt and general government debt to GDP ratios, which calculate our ability to pay. About 69% of our outstanding debt is domestic. Kaya hindi po kayo dapat mabahala dahil utang na ito galing po sa sarili natin. Ibig sabihin, karamihan ng interes ng ating binabayad ay napupunta rin lang bilang dagdag na kita ng ating mga kababayan. We are also strategically favor long-term obligations to reduce our resilience on short-term debt. Currently, long-term debts constitute about 82% of our total debt portfolio. We will continue to adopt an 80-20 borrowing mix in favor of local sources to take advantage of domestic liquidity and mitigate foreign exchange risk. Overall, we will make sure that the economy will continue to outgrow the country's debt. This will ensure that we have the ability to pay for our obligations. If we strictly adhere to our medium-term fiscal program and maintain disciplined and efficient spending, the size of the Philippine economy is projected to reach 42.6 trillion pesos by 2030, while keeping our debt at 24.7 trillion pesos, equivalent to 58% of GDP. This is well within sustainable levels. And you have every reason to be confident that we are managing our obligations prudently, that our financing strategy is clear. In fact, global credit rating agencies affirm this. This is the reason why we earned a credit rating upgrade from RNI, an outlook upgrade from S&P, and consistently high grades from other international agencies. They see what we are seeing: strong macroeconomic fundamentals, prudent debt management, high growth potential, moderate debt burden, and a stable banking system. They know our growth story is strong, our fiscal consolidation is working. We are determined to stick to our medium-term fiscal program by exercising the highest level of fiscal prudence. As I wrap up my presentation, let me assure the honorable members of the House of Representatives that we are on track with our fiscal consolidation plan across the board. We are making good, steady progress on our economic goals, and the impact of our policy decisions is now being felt. Around the world, inflation is expected to average 4.2% this year. But in the Philippines, we already brought it down to just 0.9% in July. This is the direct result of our whole-of-government approach to address high food prices. The global economy is forecasted to grow by only 3% this year, but the Philippines is set to expand at least almost twice that pace, keeping us among the fastest-growing nations in the world. In fact, for the last 3 years, since President Marcos Jr. took office, we grew at an average of 5.9%, among the fastest in Asia. And if we can grow by 6% to 7% annually for the next decade, we will be able to double the size of the Philippine economy. Ibig sabihin, ang kinikita ng bawat Pilipino, dodoble din. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to this slide because it explains a lot of what we are dealing with today. Considering the heavy debt we inherited, the higher policy rates, and the global headwinds from geopolitical tensions and trade wars, we are still growing at a respectable 5.9%. This is the highest among the past administrations, second only to the Aquino, the third administration, which started with a lighter debt load. We're also creating more jobs than ever before. Since we took off over in 2022, we have created roughly 6 million jobs on average, the highest compared to the past administrations. From just 33 million employed in 2006, we now have a record 50.5 million Filipinos at work as of June, and 31.8 million of them have formal, stable jobs. Both unemployment and underemployment are also on a steady decline. These are clear signs that job quality is rising. But we will not rest until we provide more high-quality paying jobs for our people. As opportunities grow, so too does our consumer market, our people's quality of life, and our fight against poverty. In 2023, we have already lifted 2.5 million Filipinos out of poverty since the pandemic. And we will make sure to lift 8 million more Filipinos out of poverty by the end of the President's term. This means dropping our poverty rate to single digits or 9%. This is the be-all and end-all of our efforts, as this is the definitive indicator that our growth has translated into real improvements in the lives of Filipinos through more and better jobs, higher levels of education, and healthier lives. But we cannot achieve this all on our own. Kailangan po namin ang tulong, gabay at suporta nyo sa Kongreso. To the honorable members of Congress, we are already seeing the bagong Pilipinas we promised, and it will not be built by plans alone, but by the budget you will pass in this chamber. The 2026 proposed budget of 6.793 trillion pesos that you will enact will help us get there. So let's ensure that it is a budget that works as hard as the people who fund it, the taxpayers. As we begin the deliberations for the NEP, let us all together carefully choose projects in the budget that deliver the biggest growth and economic benefits for our people. Let us operate within the parameters of the medium-term fiscal program that reduces our deficit and debt gradually, creates jobs, increases income, and decreases poverty. And above all, let us never lose sight of our core mission to deliver on the promise of a better life that every Filipino rightfully deserves under Bagong Pilipinas. And so when history looks back, it will see that the Marcos Jr. administration left the country in a better shape, stronger than we received it. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay ang Bagong Pilipinas.
Thank you very much, Secretary Recto. We would now move to the presentation of the Department of Budget and Management, as well as the remarks of the chairperson of the DBCC. May I now recognize the Honorable Secretary Amina Pangandaman, Secretary of the Department of Budget and Management and chairperson of the DBCC.
Thank you, Chair. To House Speaker Martin Romualdez, Majority Floor Leader Sandro Marcos, Senior Deputy Speaker J.J. Suarez, House Committee on Appropriations Chairperson Micaela Swansing, Senior Vice Chairperson Albert Garcia, Minority Floor Leader Marcelino Libanan, honorable members of the 20th Congress, my fellow economic managers, and colleagues in government, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for this opportunity to present the key dimensions and priorities of the fiscal year 2026 National Expenditure Program. At the onset, allow me to share that no less than our President sat down with each agency, not just once, but several times, to better understand and plan with them how we can make our agenda for prosperity truly felt by the Filipino people. And our very hardworking officials, bureaus, services, and offices at the Department of Budget and Management and DBCC, together with all departments and agencies of the executive branch, worked hand in hand to ensure the fulfillment of the needs and aspirations of the Filipino people. Hence, what we present to you is a national expenditure program that is not only strategic and fiscally sound, but most importantly, people-centered. We will also continue to pursue our agenda for prosperity, but this time with the theme of nurturing future-ready generations to achieve the full potential of the nation. This theme reflects our commitment to ensure that the budget not only meets our economic targets, but become more about truly uplifting the lives of our people, especially the next generations. At the same time, all of our efforts seek to achieve the full potential of the nation, to borrow the President's words at the last ASEAN meeting, and achieve the bagong Pilipinas we all aspire for. The fiscal year 2026 National Expenditure Program amounts to 6.793 trillion pesos, or equivalent to 22% of the gross domestic product, and is higher by 7.4%. The economic team has worked hard to ensure prudent and sound fiscal management, with our budget deficit targets in mind, considering that we receive a total proposal amounting to 10.101 trillion, way beyond our limited fiscal space. As such, the DBM carefully evaluated all